Hello, my name is Alberto Marquez. In this video we will discuss system archetypes. System archetypes gives us a framework of thought that allows us to understand the dynamics of different actors, their actions and motivations, in which sometimes we perceive unintended consequences. System archetypes. Humans act in a reactionary way. Our brains have been conditioned to react fast to potential threats in an unpredictable world for thousands of years. Thanks to our capacity for communication and intelligence, we have been able to discover patterns in nature. Sometimes we see patterns when there is not a real pattern too. This condition is named aphohenia, and is the basis for noticing patterns in lotteries and card games. In statistics, aphohenia is an example of type 1 error, the identification of fault patterns in data. Superstition has its basis on our brain capacity to find patterns that do not exist. Nonetheless, the ability to recognize patterns have given us an edge to understand our world. And with it, we have learned that the patterns of events that we perceive may not be random. The behavior of the components or participants of the system may depend on the structure of the system. That means that there could be bad outcomes even in the absence of bad intentions from the participants. To understand better these structures from the systems engineering concept, the concept of system archetypes has been developed. These archetypes are recurring structures that promote recurring behavior. They can be present in a multitude of domains since it's the structure, the interaction among the components, their goals and constraints that guide the behavior of the system. While the system that embody the archetypes may be relatively simple, the behavior of the system may not be simple. Sometimes the structure of the system contributes to the fulfillment of the goals set up for the system. In that case, the situation is ideal and we can think that the system is immersed in a virtual cycle. Other times, the system structures restrain us from achieving our results, and it seems the harder we try, the harder the system opposes our efforts. To understand better this situation, we will discuss these archetypes in this video. Drifting goals. In this archetype, there is a goal and the current state of the system. If there is a gap between the current state and the goal, a corrective action can be taken to reduce the gap. In the drifting goal situation, however, there may be incentives or structural pressures to modify the goal towards the current state. If those pressures act stronger than the corrective actions, then the goal, the original goal, will not be achieved. The drift of the goal may be so large that the performance worsens below the starting point. To reverse this effect, it is important to understand the real motivation and meta goals that drive the setup of the goals. Goals located outside of the system will be less susceptible to drift to pressures or actors within the system. The challenge is to identify legitimate goal adjustment from a drifting goal structure. The structure of drifting goal template includes two cycles that try to reduce the gap between the current state and the goal. One takes actions to modify the current state. The other takes actions to modify the goal. Both are balancing loops. Typically, changing the goal yields an immediate reduction of the gap, where changing the state of the system takes longer. When we do not track the fact that goals have historically changed, it is comforting and easy to drift away from our intended state. How does this archetype affect our decision making? When managing a project, we postpone due dates or increase budget. When we run an operation towards efficiency and efficacy, we may not notice how we have not achieved the standard and desired productivity indexes, and we may want to compensate our lack of performance with additional goal adjustments. Escalation. In this archetype, there are two actors, for which the other actor actions may be interpreted as threats. The threats affect the sense of security and therefore drives more actions from the actor. The additional actions are interpreted by the other as additional threats, which prompt even more actions on the other side. In this scenario, there are two feedback loops reinforcing each other. To worsen the situation, delays of actions or delays of information may prompt the need to act drastically early, which can be interpreted to even more aggressive behavior by the other part. Once action started, there may be a commitment to sustain the action, not to be perceived as weak, regardless of any evidence that we have acted based on overreaction. This is a very potentially damaging situation for all actors. In business, the escalation archetype is usually present in price wars and market share wars, where all actions are interpreted as a zero-sum game. In a zero-sum game, what the one actor gets is at the expense of the other actor. In the assessment of an investment decision, since there is a gap from the decision to invest to the completion of the project, if two parties invest in a project that serves the same market, it may be both end up overinvesting when they try to outsmart or outinvest the other side. Fixes that fail. Our actions are usually driven to modify our state with respect to a short-term or long-term goal. Usually long-term goals take more effort or time than short-term goals. In parallel, our performance indicators for the short-term goal may be just symptoms of a larger problem that can be solved with longer sustained corrective actions. When we focus on reducing the gap with respect to the short-term goal, we are fixing only the symptom, not the root cause problems. This is tempting because we may feel we are actually doing something to solve the problem, and because we perceive a gap is being reduced at a relatively faster pace. There may be exacerbated unintended consequences of solving the symptoms and not the problem, which include a false sense of progress, waste of valuable resources in cosmetic improvements, and the potential for unintended consequences where fixing the symptoms without fixing the real problem can generate larger or more acute problems. This archetype is comprised of two cycles, the balancing loop that tries to fix the problem in the short term and the reinforcing loop that makes the problem more difficult to solve in the long term. That is especially true when we talk about environmentally related problems. A fast fix is easier, more immediate, and politically sellable as a solution, while we are postponing the real effects of accumulated detriment of the carrying capacity of the planet. It just happens that we do not have to see them when the excess pollution just happens away from populated areas. This archetype is also manifest when there is underinvestment in maintenance, where trying to save money only reduces the productivity further, creating the need to just fix what's urgent and not preventing the obsolescence and decay of the equipment. Growth and underinvestment. In this archetype, the interpretation of reality by actors can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. The actors face the decision whether to invest or not. If an investment is made, then the potential gains of serving a market may be realized, confirming the notion that investing was the right decision. If investment is not performed or done after a delay, the system state will degenerate, gains will not realize, and the updated situation will confirm the idea that investment was not the best answer to the situation. This archetype includes two cycles, one related to the capacity to serve a market and the reaction of that market to the capacity availability, and the other cycle is the need for investment and the attractiveness to increase the capacity based on the potential payback of such investments. In the business settings, it is very common to see this archetype at play. In an interview, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple Inc., recognizes that the real reason why they manufacture in China is not the cheap labor anymore, but the investment capacity of China with trained people that has no parallel in the USA. The US vendors would have a hard time supplying from the US because it's difficult to source from the US due to shortage of suppliers within the supply chain. Limits of success. In the case of limit to success, a reinforcing loop creates conditions to grow, and the second loop limits the amount of growth due to there is no adequate preparation to support the growth, either because lack of capacity or lack of skill. The archetype suggests us the need to be prepared to anticipate a diversity of limited constraints beyond the obvious capacity of the system. In some cases, the limited constraint could degrade the state of the system so much that the previous growth could be reverted and transformed into the stagnation and even decline. With regards to the implication to real business, the inclusion of the different stakeholders early in the project can help us prepare for potential limitations to success of our project. Sometimes we need to adjust to hard limited constraints, and sometimes we can modify the limited resource to accommodate the conditions required for the success of our project. Other useful archetypes are shifting the burden, success to the successful, and tragedy of the commons. All of them represent a non-desirable situation pertaining to achieving short-term goals without realizing that the same actions taken to improve will diminish their benefit in the long run. Accommodations for the improvement of these situations include realizing the potential harm due to the structure of the relation between multiple actors in the system. Important to all of them is to be transparent with the information, share common goals or communicate the goals, and negotiate them, and consider the limiting resources that will need to be traded. Of course, all actors must realize the dangers of engaging in patterns generated by these archetypes and must work hard against their first instinct to reduce the impact of such system structures.